Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that almost everything you believe, desire, and pursue isn't truly yours. That your opinions, your ambitions, even your sense of self are echoes of the collective voice of society. Think about it. How much of what you do each day comes from your genuine individuality, and how much is simply a reflection of what the modern world has told you to be? In this video, we'll dive deep into one of the most unsettling ideas of all, that modern life, in its obsession with conformity, comfort, and mass approval, is quietly destroying our individuality, while rewarding mediocrity and collective stupidity. And by the end, we'll uncover the most powerful truth of all, one that Kierkegaard himself hinted at, about how to reclaim your inner freedom in a world that punishes independent thought. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and share this video with someone who's also questioning the world around them, because what you'll discover today might completely change how you see yourself, society, and the invisible mechanisms that keep you subdued. Now let's begin with a question. What does it truly mean to be an individual? For Kierkegaard, the individual was not just a human being living among others. The individual was a truth unto themselves, a person who dares to stand apart, who confronts the absurdity of existence face to face, without the comfort of belonging to the crowd. Yet, in modern society, individuality has been replaced by identity, a superficial costume of opinions, brands, and virtual personas designed for social approval. Kierkegaard warned us about this over a century ago. He saw the rise of what he called the crowd, a faceless collective that dissolves responsibility and truth. In his words, the crowd is untruth. He meant that when we surrender to the crowd, we surrender our capacity for authentic thought. We trade truth for consensus and conviction for convenience. In today's terms, this means scrolling through social media feeds that shape our desires, following trends that define our worth, and seeking validation through likes instead of self-understanding. But here's the tragic irony. The more connected we become, the more disconnected we feel from ourselves. The more we pursue belonging, the less we understand who we really are. Society tells us that individuality is about being different, but true individuality is not about appearance or rebellion. It's about authentic self-awareness. It's not what you show the world, but what you refuse to compromise inside yourself. Think of how the modern system rewards conformity disguised as uniqueness. We are told to be ourselves, but within strict boundaries of acceptability. You can be different, as long as your difference fits a marketable narrative. You can question things, as long as your questions don't threaten the comfort of the majority. And slowly, without realizing it, your individuality becomes a performance, not a reality. Kierkegaard's message was deeply personal and profoundly radical. The individual must stand alone before truth. This solitude is not loneliness, it's courage. It's the refusal to let the crowd define what is meaningful. But this is precisely what modern life discourages. It teaches us to follow trends, trust the algorithm, and silence our inner doubts. And as we lose touch with that inner voice, we become spectators of our own existence, passive, anxious, and numb. Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something purely because it was true to you, not because it looked good, paid well, or made sense socially? When was the last time you stood for something, even when it made you feel isolated? These are the questions Kierkegaard wanted us to face, not as a philosophical exercise, but as a matter of spiritual survival. Modern life is a master illusionist. It sells us the fantasy of freedom while subtly shaping every part of our thinking. It gives us infinite choice, but only within a predefined system. It tells us to be independent, yet punishes those who stray too far from the collective narrative. And in this paradox, stupidity becomes a virtue. The less you question, the more you fit in. The more you conform, the more you are rewarded. Kierkegaard saw this coming long before the age of social media, long before the internet turned us into brands of ourselves. He understood that the real danger is not in losing information, but in losing depth, the capacity to think, to reflect, and to feel without the crowd's interference. He warned that the crowd makes us cowardly. It numbs our moral responsibility. It convinces us that if everyone is doing it, then no one is truly guilty. And so here we are, surrounded by noise, addicted to distraction, and terrified of silence. Because in silence, the illusion breaks. In silence, we confront ourselves, and that for many is unbearable. But that's where the awakening begins. The very discomfort you feel when you disconnect, when you stop scrolling, when you question, that's your individuality trying to breathe again. Stay with me, because in the next part we'll explore how the modern system keeps you trapped, and why most people prefer to remain comfortably asleep rather than face the burden of true freedom. Think about the world we live in today. Everything is designed to keep you busy, not necessarily productive, not even truly alive, but constantly occupied. We live in an age of endless stimulation, where attention has become the most valuable currency, and silence feels like a threat. Every notification, every trending topic, every new outrage demands your reaction. And what happens to a mind that never rests? It loses the ability to think deeply. It becomes reactive, shallow, and dependent on the noise it consumes. Kierkegaard would have called this the tragedy of the reflective age. He described a time when people no longer lived passionately from within, but through reflection, through mirrors of opinion and imitation. He wrote that a crowd has no hands, but it has many eyes, meaning that the collective doesn't act. It only watches. Today, this has become our normal state. We watch more than we live. We observe, comment, react, but rarely experience something directly. We scroll through lives, opinions, and outrage, mistaking engagement for understanding. We've become experts at pretending to care about everything, yet feeling nothing deeply. Our sense of individuality dissolves in this ocean of constant comparison. The crowd no longer needs to force you to conform. It simply overwhelms you until resistance feels pointless. And this is how modern life rewards stupidity. Because stupidity, in this sense, is not about lack of intelligence. It's about the refusal to think independently. It's about surrendering your capacity for judgment in exchange for belonging. The modern world thrives on this kind of stupidity, not because it wants you to fail, but because it wants you predictable. A thinking individual is inconvenient. A reflective one is unprofitable. Look at how society praises the illusion of awareness. We are encouraged to have opinions on everything, but discouraged from truly understanding anything. We post quotes about mindfulness while being slaves to distraction. We talk about freedom while living under constant surveillance. We preach individuality while following the same social patterns as everyone else. The result? A collective consciousness that celebrates stupidity, the comfort of the unexamined life, while mocking genuine introspection as arrogance or madness. Kierkegaard saw this as a form of despair. He said that the greatest sickness is to be in despair over not being oneself. He wasn't talking about sadness. He meant the spiritual sickness of self-forgetfulness. When you let society define who you are, you abandon your authentic self. You become a mask that the world approves of, but behind that mask is emptiness. Ask yourself, how many people do you know who are truly themselves? How many speak their mind without fear, live by conviction rather than convenience, and dare to walk alone if necessary? Most of us have learned to silence the inner voice that questions, doubts, or challenges. We've replaced genuine thought with socially acceptable scripts, and the system rewards that silence. Think about it. The more you follow the algorithm, the more it feeds you what you like. The less you question, the more comfortable life feels. You don't have to think. The system thinks for you. You don't have to choose. It curates your world. You don't have to reflect. The crowd validates your emotions instantly. This is not freedom. It's sedation. Modern stupidity is intelligent, organized, and polite. It doesn't shout. It trends. It doesn't burn books. It buries truth under entertainment. It doesn't suppress individuality through force, but through pleasure. As Aldous Huxley warned, people will come to love their oppression and adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. Kierkegaard's despair meets Huxley's dystopia, and together they describe our world perfectly. But here's the paradox. Deep inside, we all feel something missing. That quiet unease that appears in moments of stillness when you're alone, disconnected, and suddenly aware that much of what you do isn't truly yours. That's the call of individuality. And most people run from it. They turn the music back on, open another app, scroll a little more, anything to avoid the confrontation with their true self. Kierkegaard called this avoidance the aesthetic life, a life lived for pleasure, novelty, and distraction. He contrasted it with the ethical life, where one begins to take responsibility for their choices and seek authentic meaning. The aesthetic life keeps you entertained, but empty. The ethical life, though more demanding, is the beginning of real freedom. So the question becomes, why do so few choose the ethical path? Why do so many choose ignorance over awakening? Because awakening hurts. It strips away illusions. It demands courage. And courage is rare in a world that rewards obedience and ridicules authenticity. Kierkegaard once wrote, "To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself." In other words, to live as an individual requires a willingness to stumble, to be misunderstood, to stand apart, to face discomfort. But modern life teaches us the opposite. It tells us that comfort is the highest good, that safety is more valuable than truth. So we trade our individuality for stability, our authenticity for acceptance, and our curiosity for convenience. We become what Kierkegaard called the crowd's reflection, neither alive nor dead, merely existing through borrowed meaning. But something extraordinary happens when you begin to notice this, when you realize how deeply the collective has infiltrated your thoughts. A spark of awareness ignites, and that spark is dangerous because it cannot be undone. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll go even deeper into this awakening and reveal the process of reclaiming individuality in a world that fears it. We'll uncover the steps Kierkegaard believed were necessary to rise above the crowd, and why doing so might be the most radical act of freedom left in our time. To reclaim your individuality in a world that thrives on conformity, you must first confront the uncomfortable truth that most of what feels like yourself has been manufactured for you. The modern world is a grand theatre, and most people are simply playing roles that were written long before they were born. Kierkegaard called this living in inauthentic despair, a quiet, unspoken suffering that comes from living a life that is not truly yours, while pretending everything is fine. The first step toward awakening is awareness, not the shallow awareness that comes from slogans or self-help cliches, but the radical kind that forces you to see the lies you've internalized. Awareness means questioning everything, especially the things that make you comfortable. It means asking, what if my success, my happiness, my beliefs are all reflections of what others expect from me? Modern life is designed to suppress that kind of questioning. It keeps you busy, distracted, and anxious. You are surrounded by entertainment that numbs your reflection, by information that floods your mind, but never nourishes your soul. You are told to be positive rather than to be honest, to go with the flow rather than to resist the current. In this environment, the act of thinking becomes an act of rebellion. Kierkegaard believed that to truly exist, one must first experience despair, not as something to escape, but as something to transform. Despair, in his philosophy, is the moment you realize you've been living a lie. It is the breakdown that precedes awakening. He wrote that despair is the sickness unto death, but also the beginning of life. Because only when the false self collapses can the real self emerge. Imagine a person who has spent their whole life chasing validation, from parents, peers, or society. They achieve everything they were told to desire, yet feel an emptiness they can't explain. That emptiness is the whisper of truth, the realization that they've lived someone else's story. The pain of that realization is immense, but it's also sacred. It's the moment the individual begins to wake up. This awakening is not glamorous. It's not about instant enlightenment or spiritual slogans. It's messy, lonely, and disorienting. You begin to see through the illusions that once defined your world, the social games, the false ambitions, the collective stupidity disguised as wisdom. You realize that most people are not free. They're merely busy. And that realization distances you from them. You will feel misunderstood. You will be tempted to go back to sleep. Kierkegaard warned that the individual who awakens often feels crucified by the crowd, because the awakened person threatens the comfort of the conformists. The crowd doesn't want truth, it wants validation. It will try to pull you back with fear, ridicule, and moral guilt. But this resistance is proof that you're growing beyond its control. Here's the paradox. Individuality begins with separation, but it leads to deeper connection. Once you stop trying to belong everywhere, you begin to belong somewhere real. Once you stop seeking validation, you begin to see the world more clearly. And compassion grows naturally, not as an ideology, but as an insight born of self-knowledge. Kierkegaard called this the movement from despair to faith, not religious faith necessarily, but faith in existence, in one's own responsibility to live truthfully. Faith, in Kierkegaard's sense, is the courage to live without guarantees. It's choosing meaning even when the world offers none. It's saying yes to life on your own terms, even when it isolates you. That is individuality at its purest form. Not arrogance, not ego, but authenticity, born of confrontation with nothingness. And this is precisely what modern life tries to prevent, because once you find this kind of freedom, you are no longer controllable. You no longer need the approval of the system, the validation of the crowd, or the comfort of collective stupidity. You become what Kierkegaard called the single individual, a person who stands before the infinite with courage and humility. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped trying to please everyone? If you stopped chasing trends, stopped performing, stopped apologizing for being different? What would happen if you decided that your inner truth mattered more than public opinion? These are dangerous questions, but they're the only ones that lead to real transformation. The second step toward reclaiming individuality is commitment. Once you've seen through the illusions, you must decide what you will stand for. Modern life trains us to be perpetual observers, to avoid decisive choices. We fear commitment because it limits our options. But Kierkegaard argued that true freedom only emerges when you choose. Without commitment, we drift. With commitment, we anchor. Choosing to live authentically means accepting responsibility for your existence. It means saying, this is who I am, this is what I believe, and I will live by it, even if it costs me approval. This kind of courage terrifies the crowd, because the individual who has discovered their own meaning is ungovernable. They cannot be manipulated through fear, envy, or shame. But here's the challenge. You will pay a price for this freedom. You will lose friends who prefer the illusion. You will encounter ridicule, misunderstanding, and loneliness. Kierkegaard called this the anguish of freedom. Yet paradoxically, it's in this anguish that joy begins to bloom. Because joy, unlike pleasure, cannot be mass-produced. It arises from authenticity, from knowing that even if the whole world misunderstands you, you have remained true to yourself. And that is the silent rebellion that modern life fears most. Not loud protests or slogans, but quiet, unwavering authenticity. The individual who refuses to be absorbed by the collective stupidity is the true revolutionary. Stay with me, because in the final part, we'll explore the ultimate revelation, how to live as a truly free individual in an unfree world. We'll see how Kierkegaard's wisdom connects to the psychological insights of modern thinkers and discover the final step toward inner liberation, the one that transforms despair into strength and solitude into transcendence. To live as a truly free individual in an unfree world is one of the hardest, most courageous acts a human being can undertake. Kierkegaard knew that society would always pressure the individual to conform, to blend in, to obey, to surrender their will to the comfort of the majority. Yet he also believed that genuine meaning could only be found in the act of standing alone before truth. But what does that mean today in our hyper-connected, algorithmic age? It means reclaiming the one thing the system cannot commodify, your inner life. Modern life offers endless substitutes for meaning, entertainment, status, productivity, noise. It promises fulfillment, but delivers distraction. The only real rebellion left is to think, to feel deeply, and to live consciously. Kierkegaard taught that the highest task of every human being is to become a self, not a social mask, not a digital identity, not a collection of achievements, but a self that exists in truth. This kind of existence doesn't begin when you gain something. It begins when you strip away everything false. It's the moment you stop asking, "What should I do to be liked?" and start asking, "What must I do to be real?" The modern system fears such people because they cannot be predicted. They don't buy meaning. They create it. They don't seek validation. They offer authenticity. They don't follow the crowd. They walk their own path quietly with conviction. And it's this quiet strength that transforms everything around them. Let's pause for a moment. Think about how rare this is today. Most people live in what psychologist Erich Fromm later called the escape from freedom. Freedom terrifies them because it demands responsibility. It requires the courage to say, "I will not let the world define me." It means being fully awake in a culture that rewards sleepwalkers. And that's why Kierkegaard's message is so revolutionary even now. To be an individual is not a privilege, it's a moral duty. Modern stupidity, as we've seen, is not about ignorance. It's about the refusal to engage with life authentically. It's the comfort of clichés, the addiction to certainty, the fear of thinking differently. It thrives on imitation and punishes depth. The individual who refuses to participate in this theater becomes dangerous, not because they threaten the system through violence, but because they reveal that the emperor has no clothes. The moment you begin to live consciously, you start to see through the illusions, the endless chase for approval, the fake urgency of trends, the performative morality that hides cowardice beneath virtue signaling. You begin to understand that true intelligence is not about knowing everything, but about seeing clearly, seeing the world as it is, and still choosing to act with integrity. And that choice, to see clearly and still live truthfully, is the essence of Kierkegaard's concept of faith. Faith for him was not blind belief in dogma. It was the courage to trust existence even in the face of uncertainty. It was the leap beyond logic, beyond the crowd, into the vast and terrifying freedom of being fully alive. Psychologist Viktor Frankl later echoed this in his own way. After surviving the horrors of concentration camps, he wrote that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This freedom is not given by society. It is discovered within. It's the same truth Kierkegaard spoke of, that meaning is not found in the world but created through your relationship with it. So what does it mean, practically, to live this way today? It means reclaiming time for reflection. It means disconnecting from the noise long enough to hear your own thoughts again. It means being willing to be misunderstood. It means valuing truth over comfort, depth over popularity, and sincerity over acceptance. It means cultivating solitude, not as isolation but as nourishment. In silence, you rediscover yourself. In reflection, you recognize what truly matters. Kierkegaard wrote that the most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. He was warning us not to waste our lives on what others expect. Every moment you live in imitation is a moment of your real life lost. Ask yourself right now, what would my life look like if I lived in alignment with my deepest truth? What would I have to let go of? And what might I finally gain? You might lose comfort. You might lose approval. But what you'll gain is authenticity. And authenticity is worth everything. It's the foundation of real happiness, real love, and real strength. Because when you know who you are, you no longer need the world's permission to exist. Kierkegaard once said that purity of heart is to will one thing, that one thing is truth. Not abstract truth, but the lived truth of your own existence. When you live with purity of heart, your life ceases to be a performance. You stop seeking meaning in the crowd and start finding it in the quiet dialogue between yourself and the infinite. And when you reach this point, something extraordinary happens. The stupidity of the world no longer angers you. It saddens you. The conformity of others no longer provokes your ego. It awakens your compassion. You realize that everyone is fighting the same invisible battle, the struggle between fear and freedom, between comfort and authenticity. And though you cannot wake them all, you can embody the light of someone who is awake. So let this be the final revelation, the most important truth of all. Modern life may try to destroy individuality, but it can only succeed if you consent. No system, no crowd, no ideology can erase the self that dares to think, to feel, and to choose with awareness. The power of individuality lies not in separating from humanity, but in becoming fully human, in refusing to be reduced to a number, a trend, a label. The world rewards stupidity because stupidity is safe, but life itself rewards authenticity, the courage to think freely, live truthfully, and love deeply despite the chaos. So think, reflect. Dare to be the single individual that Kierkegaard spoke of, because in a time when conformity is celebrated and stupidity is rewarded, to live authentically, to live as yourself, is not only a philosophical act, it is a sacred one. Thanks for looking.